5:30. So I'm going to call the Finance Committee meeting of April 18, 2023 to order, which was posted for 5:30. And pursuant to actions of the legislature suspending certain sections of the open meeting law, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to attend the meeting may do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public is being permitted, but every effort is made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. And I also want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded so that you're aware of that. And with that said, we'll go through the members who are present to make sure that they can hear and be heard, and note that Bob Hegner had notified me in advance that he is unable to attend today. So just going alphabetically by last name, Anna.
Hello. I can hear you.
And Lynn.
Present.
Matt.
Present.
Bernie.
Present.
Kathy.
Here.
And Alicia.
Here.
Okay. And Alicia had let me know just prior to the meeting that she's only going to be able to be here for an hour. So I've offered to her, since we had established an order for the agenda, that if she wanted to postpone an agenda item that she has a particular interest in, that she could let us know. Because I'm sorry that I know you've been struggling to find a time, but in any event, the first agenda item is to talk about two items related to the regional schools. Superintendent had been at the last council meeting and had presented the budget, which was then referred for the regional schools, which was referred to the committee. And this is the meeting, and Dr. Morris is not here, but Doug Slaughter, representing the schools as the school finance director, is here to answer questions about the budget. And it's both the operating budget and the capital budget are both items on the agenda. So with that said, Doug, do you have any thing that you want to say in introduction?
Andy, before, and you may have just said this, I apologize. The agenda does have public comment before we get into the regional school topics. Did you want to save that to the end?
Actually, thank you for pointing that out. Let me just see. I didn't look at the attendee list. I don't know if anybody else has.
Yeah, we have one person with their hand raised, and we do have 4 members of the public, just in case they looked at the agenda and wanted to give comment, thinking it would be first. Okay.
No, thank you very much for pointing that out. And to notify all members of the public that we do have practiced at all of our meetings that we have a period of public comment. I've been trying to get it to the beginning of the meeting in order to make it a more regular time. So appreciate the reminder. And please raise your hand if you'd like to make public comment. It can be about items on the agenda, but anything that you think that is important for the Finance Committee, whether or not on the agenda item, certainly you're welcome to raise your hand, and we will be glad to hear from you. And with that, I'll start with Tony Cunningham. Tony, hi. Good afternoon.
Hi, thanks, Sean. Yes, I was hoping to make this at the beginning of the meeting because I'm in the middle of making dinner. So Tony Cunningham, North Amherst. My comments are on the funding requests before you today. Specifically, I believe funds to demolish the gas station on Montague Road should come out of the capital budget and not free cash. The town's financial management policies and objectives state that free cash and stabilization reserve funds are for unforeseen and extraordinary expenses and to sustain services during economic downturns. The gas station was purchased 6 years ago. I was at the groundbreaking of the North Amherst Library last June. The need to demolish the gas station is neither unforeseen nor extraordinary, and I would expect that funds for the demolition should have been requested through the Joint Capital Planning Committee last year or this year. I encourage you to reject the financial order, to take the money from free cash, and instead recommend that the town manager fit it within the FY24 capital budget, which is not yet final. If the demolition is so urgent that funds are needed before July, then I suggest you recommend that Sean look into repurposing unspent capital funds to cover it. Regarding the part of this request that is for paving and landscaping to integrate the library and gas station sites, I think you should first find out more about how that fits in with the larger North Amherst intersection project. The last plan I saw showed a roadway going right through there, linking Sunderland and Montague roads. It would seem unwise to spend money on paving if it is soon to be dug up for a road, which leads me to ask, has the town prepared a MassWorks infrastructure grant application for the 2023 round? I understand the application deadline is June 2nd. With the North Square development complete, the North Amherst Library expansion almost finished, and the Valley CDC housing project at Ball Lane in the works, it seems a very compelling MassWorks application to redo the North Amherst intersection could be developed. And the other financial order I want to comment on is the reuse water system. I am glad you are rescinding the balance of the 5 million borrowing authorization. This capital project should never have been paid for out of town funds, in my opinion, as it was to benefit UMass. I would really like to see the town pursue getting back from the university the $300,000 that has been spent on this project to date. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciated. And the items that you reflect, you talked about regarding an order, I'm sure will be discussed again when we get to the item, but sounds like you have other things going. Anyway, thank you. Mary, Becky, you join us, and hey, Mary, you can
Thank you. Is that
unmute.
better?
You're on.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Maria Kapicki, South Amherst. We've just had a debate about the use of reserves to support the new school project. The people of Amherst were told by the town council that they will be the only ones to pay for it without meaningful help from the $24 million of reserves. Some of you said that was because that money is being saved for the fire station project, despite there being no evidence of progress toward that end. At the same meeting, the orders on today's agenda were referred to the Finance Committee seeking to use reserves for other purposes, including, as Tony just mentioned, the demolition of a gas station that is in no way a surprise, a crisis, or the fire station. I want to repeat the town policies and objectives that Tony mentioned, and that was included in an October report from this committee, stating that the primary objective of the town's reserve is to provide for unforeseen and extraordinary expenses. It further states that free cash in excess of the goal reserve amount should be used for non-recurring emergency expenditures or appropriated to a stabilization fund for future capital projects and equipment purchases, or used to provide property tax relief. Again, used to provide property tax relief. I submit that there's a very strong case to use more of the $24 million in reserves for the school project, which would be providing property tax relief, but not to use it to cover costs for predictable expenses that should be part of the regular capital budget process. In short, this committee and the town council need to apply your own fiscal guidelines on reserves consistently and not as a ploy when it suits some other purpose. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Have the same comment as I made before, and appreciation. So thank you for being with us. Is there anybody else who's in the audience who would like to be recognized? If not, then we'll get back to Doug Slaughter. And Doug Slaughter, Is there any introductory comments that you'd like to make now about the school budget, regional school budget in capital request?
I don't think so. I think the thing I'll say is it's largely unchanged from when you last saw it at the Four Towns meeting. I think the biggest difference, as I noted at your full council meeting, was the increase from 2.5% to a 3% increase in the assessment for Amherst, which then had a cascading effect to Shutesbury and the amount that they would contribute to their assessment for the operating budget. And that our resulting increase of about $97,000 or so at this point in time, we put into our contingency and control accounts because we're still negotiating several contracts, and so we're not sure we're ready to restore something from our sort of reductions list when we have that outstanding sort of potential cost there. So it is in a bit of a it's in a control account so that we can, if needed, be used to resolve those contracts and how they resolve. So that's what we've done with the additional resources that you gave to us. That's why they're highlighted in some of the materials you have today. And I think that's where I'll stop for now, because I think it's been sort of out there for you guys to look at for a while. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has about operating or capital budgets.
Okay. Shall we start and see if anybody has questions about the operating budget? Kathy.
Thanks, Doug. Needless to say, reading through what you gave us is a bit daunting, but thank you. I have a question just on a line to understand how you track it. You have a line for contingency and a line for reserve. And you show that as for the coming year, it's in the, if I add the two together, it's about $860,000, and the year before it was 920. Do you show what happened to the year before? So of the 920, that would have been the current year, or if I go back several years, do you have a running account to say this was what we were carrying and this is what we had at the end of the year?
We do. I mean, generally speaking, that contingency and reserve lines are fairly small, fairly modest. They cover things like mid-year degree changes and contractual obligations, some retirement incentives, that sort of thing. So generally, in the last 3 previously completed fiscal years, we had in fiscal 20 it was $61,000. In fiscal 21 it was about $2,000, and in fiscal 22 it was about $1,000. Well, it's what we actually spent in each of those, and partly because we had other. Sometimes that's smaller because we use other resources within the rest of the budget to cover some of the costs we have. We also don't incur those expenses always. The reason they're so large in the current fiscal year and in next fiscal year is because in both of those years, we're still anticipating the resolution of several contracts, and those are where we carry a good portion of our estimates for what resources we'll need to cover those contracts. And so they're fairly large for the current year and for next year, because there's a pretty sizable chunk of money in there for the resolution of those contracts. In most years, it's a fairly modest number in the for sort of $50,000-$60,000 range, and then it depends as we go through our budget process whether things like sabbatical leaves are included or not. We usually find out early enough that we can deduct that. So I think it's a tricky part of the budget to look at, and especially tricky to look at over time. And certainly with the current year and next year, we have a lot of uncertainty because of unsettled contracts, and so those numbers are fairly large. And then the reality is, once we settle those contracts, that funding that's there will end up in our payroll accounts up at the top of the chart, as it were, in our consolidated spending plan. So hopefully that helps paint the picture a little bit.
Yeah, if you have follow-up.
No, that answered my question on that. I'm just waiting to see. I have a couple other questions, so I just want to see whether other people have questions before I take up more time.
Lynn?
Yeah, Doug, would you go back to your statement earlier when you talked about the 2.5% to the 3% and the impact on Shutesbury? And just explain that a little further and please, thank you.
So, we have a less formal, but certainly consensus opinion about how we are going about our assessment method at present time. And so we use a 5-year average of our minimum local contributions. And then once we've sort of assessed that amount of money, then we use our regional agreement method, which is a 5-year rolling average of students. And that's how we apportion the cost to each of the districts. But the one other piece that we put into that formulation is that we have a 4% guardrail that we apply just to sort of moderate increases to communities, both positive and negative. In the current year, so for fiscal 24, both Pelham and Leverett are at that, their increases were greater than 4%, even before the change that you're asking about. So we knew that they would be unimpacted because they'd still be held harmless, I guess, is one way to say it. Not really, but held to a limit of a 4% increase. So those would hold still. And so with the increase in the funding that Amherst was available to put forward in their assessment, the impact was that Shutesbury was tasked with a higher assessment as well. Technically, all 4 would have gone up, but because we used the guardrails, then we held Leverett and Leverett and Pelham to a 4% increase. But that increase for Shutesbury was about $9,050 or something about that. And so I reached out to, once we knew that the town of Amherst had the additional resources available, I reached out to Shutesbury to get some feedback, because this was, a bit of late breaking news. It's not unmanageable, but later than they were expecting. And after we'd had our 4 towns meeting, I reached out to them to see about that impact and whether their select board, finance committee, et cetera, had any comments relative to that. And was assured by the town administrator in Shutesbury that they talked about it. It was fine, that they could manage that additional increase. They had other reductions in other areas of their budget overall that allowed them to, easily take that into consideration this year. And at the same time, there's still less than 1% increase over last year. So, they really felt they could and would be able to cover that additional increase in their assessment.
The thing that keeps coming back for me with the guardrails is the extent to which the smaller schools are protected with the guardrails. And I understand that you respect, and we really want to thank you for respecting the fact that we have said initially 2.5 and then 3%. And some point in time, it would probably be useful to just understand what, for example, Pelham and Leverett would be paying if they, I assume the chart now shows what they would be paying since we upped ours to 3%, except for the guardrails at 4%.
Yeah, in one of the handouts that had the
Right.
budget related motions, there's a figure with blue stripes across it.
Yeah.
The left one of those shows the amount that Pelham and Leverett would be charged if we didn't have guardrails.
Okay.
So you can see that full impact for them.
Got it. Thank you.
Emma?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I think you touched on this when you were responding to Kathy's question, and I apologize if I'm being redundant. So with contracts that have yet to be settled, and what I'm hearing is that you're estimating a budget, and I'm assuming estimating high or kind of straight down the middle. I'm curious how that shakes out. And I apologize if this is too kind of big picture, but I'm trying to figure out how that shakes out and how that impacts member towns. And then I have a separate sort of irrelevant question that I think I should just email Paul about with changes to that. So yeah, contracts. And can you just give me a quick overview on how that works, the timelines of all of it?
So I have a really large crystal ball that I use now. I'm kidding.
That's what I figured.
So
Yeah.
what we know is that we generally have in each of our contracts a grid which has lanes and has steps involved. And
Right.
so we know where people sit on the current structure. And so what we generally do is as we go from one year to the next, we take a snapshot, a level services snapshot, who's working for us right now. And we basically give them all a step and see sort of where they are on the salary grid. And then usually the other piece that's factored into one year to the next is a cost of living increase. And so we made an estimate of what we think that cost of living increase would look like. And we basically, when we do that, we are estimating to some extent what we think you guys can afford. You meaning the town of Amherst, the town of Leverett, Pelham, Shutesbury, et cetera. So we understand and recognize how Prop 2.5 works, how new growth works. We listen carefully when you guys are doing financial forecasting in November and talking about what you think is going to happen with state aid and all of those things. And so we're factoring that in, and we're trying to pick a number that is within the realm of possibility. And the other thing that's a big unknown for us is that we don't know how the negotiations are going to necessarily turn out. So there could be, if you keep your structure of your salary grids the same, and then it's just a COLA, that's a pretty straightforward kind of apples to apples thing. But if you restructure, which we've done in a few of our contracts recently, because it's been a while, so we restructure, we still have a sort of totality of available funds that we're still working from as we go through our process of negotiating. As well as understanding, and always keeping in mind as we budget sort of what resources are available. So and when I did an initial estimate, basically we stepped everybody to the next step. We did an estimate of a cost of living increase that we think would not result, which seemed reasonable relative to the sort of constraints under which you and the other three communities operate. And then we cross our fingers and hope the best at that point in some respects. I don't mean to be glib about it, but at the same time, we're trying to, I can't put a 12% COLA in because it's just not possible for any of the four towns to tolerate that kind of an increase to salaries and wages. So, we try to pick a number that's functional within the budgets that people are going to be operating within.
So when we're looking at this budget and we're also hearing that there will be positional cuts, it's not a level services budget then, right? If you're cutting positions, because isn't that cutting services in some way? Or is that different because you're expecting other educators to pick up the workload?
So it's not quite level services. I will say the tricky thing this year is because we've got some federal grant monies from COVID called ESSER funds. We have those grant funds that are funding a lot of positions.
Right.
So what we're doing is people that are currently funded in the current fiscal year are currently funded from that. Not exclusively, but largely that's where the cuts to positions are going to happen. And so then that frees up what we would have used from ESSER on salaries to then be applied to the budget more broadly. But it is, there are fewer people working for us than there are now as a result of this. And so it's not level services. It is, if you exclude the kinds of things we're doing with ESSER, then those services are held fairly harmless. And again, that's not to diminish the work that gets done there, but with those ESSER funds, and we're going to miss that, and it will have an impact. And so we're trying to, in some of the choices, you'll see in that list of adds and reductions, you'll see some positions that sort of show up in both places, in both an add and a reduction. And the idea is that, well, we took it off of one source of funding, sort of this external source, and put it on to our other, but most of those positions are reduced. So there's some trading back and forth based on enrollment, so those kind of things. But largely it's funded, positions are funded by a grant that we're going to go away in a year anyway. So it's sort of an early version of that reduction that we're going to see. And yeah, we're going to be less than what we were this year.
Thank you for bearing with me as I run at the learning curve. Thank you.
Kathy?
Yeah, I want to pick up on the concept of level services, but segue to some questions about enrollment. If enrollment declines, at some point, you'd expect staffing to decline, not necessarily in each position. So I don't know what you call that, but it's different then I think if enrollment was going up and you saw staffing cuts or there was stagnant. So enrollment is down about 100 total children since 2 or 3 years ago, 300 and a large amount. So I was trying to track, thank you for giving me the time, but it looks to me like there's been a shift in the budget. And I can't see the special needs versus regular, but during that the 5-year time period where I can see dollars is special needs. And the regular account is we're spending more than we're spending for regular. So I don't know whether the special needs group is growing and the regular is declining, or the regular is about the same, so I'm trying to get some sense, is the composition of middle and high school changing? That was question number 1. And I'll just ask the other one. I don't have how many over, the last 5 years or 10 years, how many are going to the charter school from either the middle or the high school? How many are coming into us or going out of us on school choice, that flow of in and out from public, which would give me a better sense of what the underlying, some of what the story is on what's happening. Because I know charter takes a lot of money out of the school system, probably a whole lot more. Well, I know a lot more than you see as a decrease in expenses. It's not like one student leaves and suddenly $24,000 less is spent. But I think getting some kind of analysis would be useful. So I'm not asking for all of that right now, Doug, but that is looking over time. Are we starting to adjust staffing to where the actual enrollment is the big question. And then is there a shift in enrollment away from regular towards special, or is special growing? And then where does charter fit into that whole equation?
Right. So I'll say, I'll take that last part first. I think in this regard, I think the number of students that we have going to charter schools has been fairly stable over the last few years. And so I think from just a raw number of kids standpoint, we've been pretty steady with that, which is encouraging, because then it makes the sort of impact a little more predictable in some respects. When you have a growing population, which was the case, several years ago, especially when charter schools were new and there were a big, number of schools were formed, and you had this sort of every year increase in the number of students. That's a much harder circumstance because you're trying to project and predict how many you have. But we've noticed that we've had a fairly steady level, plus or minus 1 or 2 students for the last few years, and so that's helpful to us because the sort of budgetary impact is stabilized. It's not. I will say that the outflow of money to charter schools is significant, but it's more predictable because I think our enrollment in those programs has held fairly steady. And ideally, we'd like to bring more of those kids back, or not lose them in the first place. With 7th grade, you sort of lose some. We do get some back, but what we've had a sort of steady state for the last couple of years, I would suggest, and I'm hopeful that we can continue that, if not shrink that population. Back to your other questions around sort of population shifts in who we've got, that sort of thing. And again, this plays into charter a little bit, because again, if you look at charter schools, I think the number of special education students that they have and severity of the needs of those students is probably, and this is a very, very broad generalization, is likely less than what we have to work with here. So the kids that and I'll pick on Springfield because they've got a science and technology charter school in Springfield. I doubt that they're attracting a lot of highly needy students from a special education standpoint. They might, but it oftentimes is a complication that's too great to manage in a charter school. So I think that's one of those, when you get into the charter formula and some of that sort of stuff, that gets a little problematic in my opinion. So that's a little bit of an opinion by me personally. So I'll couch that a little bit. But as far as our population in the building and special education costs, there's a couple different pieces to that. I don't know that we've had a strong increase necessarily in the number of special education students. I do think, and if you ask our student services director, Faye Brady, she'd say that the acuity or the significance or the complexity of some of the kids' needs have increased over the last couple of years. The pandemic's not done us any favors in that regard. So the level of need, the kinds of support kids need has gone up. That's increased our costs there to some extent. I think strongly impacting us for fiscal 24 in particular was for our district placements that are out of district. Those costs for those programs are set by the state. They did a 14% increase this year on those costs. So even if we held the number of students fairly steady, which we do, and with the programs that we operate within our district, we have a lot fewer out of district placement students. But nonetheless, those were pretty significant increases in those costs for the coming year, and that really impacted this year's increase. I don't know if you looked at the special ed in particular, but it's double-digit increase in costs, and that's a lot of that's driven by those costs. There are other costs in special education that have also risen, and needs we have for students, because I think the severity and acuity of the kind of problems and supports that they need have increased. So it's a combination of factors. I don't think the raw headcount hasn't changed that much. I think some of the costs that go with those kids has gone up a little more aggressively than some of the other regular education costs. So I think that drives that piece of the budget a little harder than the regular education costs. To the question of sort of reducing overall enrollment going down and sort of impact, it's sort of a stair-step method. You don't, it's not, you lose 100 students, you can reduce it by exactly 4% or whatever the magic number is. It doesn't work that way because classes aren't, one kid, right? So class sizes are,
Sure.
Of a certain size. I think what you see at the middle school this year, in particular, if you look at the reductions and there's a half a team, which is 2 teaching staff. That's, part of that is being leveraged to go to a dean's position, but the ability to reduce those 2 staff, sort of regardless of our budget, we would have probably moved that forward as a reduction we need to do because we just don't have the students to merit it. And certainly that's a cost we can't incur at this point in good conscience. So it keeps our class sizes, given the reduced number of students, our class sizes are going to hold fairly common to what they are this year. And so we're looking for those. And I think that's a difficulty as you continue to have a declining enrollment. What's our programmatic structure we're trying to be? Are we still able to be a comprehensive high school? Can we offer the broad, the breadth and depth of courses that we offer? Do we have to change our paradigm around certain things, whether it be special education, regular education, et cetera? All those things are on the table. I mean, we see if you look at the fact that we're, leveraging over $1 million in one-time money to help balance this budget, and that's where we start, fiscal 25. There's a real deep philosophical set of questions we're going to be asking ourselves as we go into fiscal 25 of what's our school supposed to look like, how do we stay competitive relative to charter schools and choice to other districts, and how do we keep offering the things we want to offer in our program. Those are the hard questions coming up for sure, and things we're already starting to think about in some way because we can see the writing on the wall, as they say. Hopefully that paints a little bit of that picture around some of those topics.
No, you did answer. Andy, can I just follow up with one question? I think I know the answer to it. Still on, if the 6th grade moves up, I understand what you ran into in terms of you need to treat it like a school within a school, but can 6th graders take language courses? Could 6th graders take art courses? Could they take music courses so that those programs would have a somewhat more potential robust enrollment, because you just have 3 grades and 6th graders are, in my opinion, more than capable of doing the music and art programs, and they could certainly start a language if they're not already coming up out of the Cominantes program, which they wouldn't be. But is there the potential for doing that?
I think there's some. I think that's some of what has been discussed. I'm not as familiar, particularly around. I know they've spent a lot of time thinking about how to potentially offer some world language, some introduction to that for 6th grade, because there's some staff, in the building already doing it for 7th and 8th grade, and how do they fit together and yet still keep, the appropriate balance and not we do have Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury. They're going to have 7th graders join, and so we don't want to over advantage certain kids over others. In some respects, that's part of the mix too. But I think there are some economies there. I think it's around some shared staffing. I think we're hopeful for that, and I think we're still exploring that a little bit. To what extent licensure plays in a little bit, but there's a fair amount of licensure that's sort of 5th to 8th grade. So hopefully a lot of people that where we can leverage that overlap and fractionally pay some of them from Amherst and some of them from region. We'll definitely do that whenever and wherever we can. I think the hard thing is the administration piece, because it is its own school. You have to kind of build and have some of these other staff that sit in those administrative roles and hold that responsibility and report on those things. Don't go away. So you kind of trade one thing for another in some respects. So hopefully in the net we can end up in a positive place financially, but it's moderated by the fact that it's a separate school. And I think the superintendent said this too, is that there's opportunities. The state has taken a little kinder view to targeted types of modifications to a regional agreement, and so that may be an opportunity to sort of rethink how we work with the 6th grade in our middle school building, and whether we can potentially find a way and be partnered with our other 3 communities to do this. But can we make a small adjustment or small adjustments to the regional agreement in a way to bring that 6th grade in and sort of get the benefit of shared staff without quite as much overhead of administration. So those are all in the mix, I would say, and we're still trying to get a little more sense of that. But it is a question that is not as daunting as it once was, because it formerly, with opening a regional agreement, it was a very big and lengthy and tedious and expensive prospect to do. And if we can be, I think, kind of focused in that regard, and again, this is something that myself or the superintendent can't really initiate. It's got to be kind of school committee and council and select boards and that sort of thing that sort of want to move in that direction. But that may be an option that makes that 6th grade move a little more viable and financially beneficial across the board.
Thank you.
Lynn?
Thanks. So I want to pick up on the 6th grade move and just make sure I understand that, because what you've just said, because DESE has perhaps made altering a regional agreement a little less onerous, that when we move the 6th grade to the middle school, we may actually be able to treat them more like part of the regional district. And then the question is, how do the other 3 elementary schools plan to play in that? Do they, will we become, and are we having conversations about the possibility that we will become a 6 to 12 regional school in 2 years or whatever it would be? So that's kind of what I'm hearing, is that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the DESE is a little more open to narrower adjustments to regional agreements. So that's, I think, beneficial. I think that opens a wide variety of potential outcomes. It could be that we make Amherst the only one that's a 6th grade to 12th grade, and everybody else stays with 7 to 12. I mean, I think we want to explore that whole range of options, I would suggest, and see, the willingness and interest by the other communities. I think would be part and parcel of that conversation. It could be that, yes, 6 to 12 would, for the whole of all 4 towns, might be the direction we end up. It might be a thing where it's not that, and I think each of the towns is going to have to explore that question, and then collectively have to explore those questions together. Because I think the financial piece of that is pretty significant. And if you sort of think about when you have a single school in Pelham, or a single school in Leverett, or a single school in Shutesbury, you take 1/7 of that out of the building. Something's aren't better off. You know, you still have a full-time nurse, you still have a full-time librarian, or
Right.
or whatever circumstances. I mean, there are certain positions that don't get reduced by 1/7 when you do that. You know, you have a sixth grade, you know, and what do you do with the staff? Do they get hired by the regional district? And you know, there's some economies there that reduce the classroom needs, perhaps. And so there's a whole host of questions that go with that. And some of them are first year problems, you know, sort of once you make, you know, the transition year is the hard one. But some of them are also sort of what's the more systemic, you know, impact on that school that's staying in the, you know, in the kids that are staying in the building that's in those towns. And in Amherst with 3 elementary schools, that's a more modest impact, and we quite frankly need the space in some schools, and it's necessary for the new building at the Fort River site, you know, because it's a K-5 school. So you know, in Amherst, it's a pretty clear direction we've got in the need to move to the 6th grade. I think for the others, it's a more open question, but I think we got to engage those towns in that regard.
Right, and but I'm correct that we've delayed that move until the new elementary school opens.
Yeah.
Okay, which makes lots of sense. I do have a totally other issue, but go ahead, Doug.
I was just going to say, I think it'll take us that time, the sort of 2 years of time, you know, because we're going to build a building, hoping that I'm presuming that the override will pass. So we're going to build a building, and there's a lot of things that go with that. So I think sort of in that same time frame, where you know the series of questions around a 6th grade being part of a regional school district, and how to address those questions and ask them and pose it and get those resolved. That's all part of that 2-year process, I think. And so we'll simultaneously deal with that, as long with getting the school building built and try to manage the budgets we have too.
Okay. So this is really a research question, and I'm not clear it's even fair to ask it of you. But I do have some serious concerns about the comparison of the demographic makeup of charter schools versus regular public schools, and whether it's leading to segregation at some level. And I didn't know whether you were aware if anybody was looking at that, or if that data, I'm assuming I could go on the DESE website and find that data.
Yeah, you can. I think, the charter schools report their enrollments and their groups of kids the same way that we do. So that data is all sitting there and available. And I think it depends on the school too. I mean, I think some schools, some of the charter schools are much more parallel to say our district, or parallel to other districts. Some are not. And I think, that, and there's good and bad about that. I don't want to state one thing or another about that, but it also, there's conversations and action that people want to take around the funding formula. I think that should be a factor in the consideration of that in that funding formula, because I think it's I think you can make a fairly simple argument that it places an undue burden on the home district. Depending on what charter schools are available. Something that Mr. Mangano and I have talked about is that transportation is a big deal. So it speaking of segregation, so economically, not just sort of special ed or other kinds of things. If you've got the means to get your child to the charter school, you can go to a charter school. If you don't have a way to get there, you can't get there. That's a tough circumstance, and that's not necessarily fair when you're trying to make these schools accessible to everyone. So I think there are some definite questions in my mind anyway around some of those equity type issues that arise.
Right. Okay. My next other questions are more about capital. So I'm.
Yeah, I wanted to try and move it along to capital. I have one question on operating, and then see if we can get agreement to just go and move to capital so that we can move through the agenda fully today. The revenue presumptions that you made on revenue that is not from town assessments, of course, a large part of it is the lines of state support that you receive. And the region has the same problem that cities and towns have, that we're commanded to develop budgets before the state finishes its budget process. And as a consequence, we're sitting here never sure about how much we're going to be getting for our unrestricted government aid or Chapter 70. You're not sure about Chapter 70 or regional transportation or other lines that are within the budget. This year, as I looked at the cherry sheet that was just published on Saturday for the House Ways and Means budget, there's a significant increase in one of the lines, which is regional transportation. And I know from my role in the Mass Municipal Association, we're doing a lot of work and a lot of effort in trying to get a per dollar increase for the minimum aid districts, which includes the region and the town, from where it started, the low number of 30 that was put into the governor's budget. It's now been doubled, and we're hoping that it's going to be getting up to the $100 mark that the MMA has asked. What can or the region do in adjusting its budget if that revenue comes in higher than you projected at the time that you put together the budget that you're presenting to us?
So there's a couple of things we can do. I think with Chapter 70, that difference between $30 and $60 per student works out to about $40,000 for us. So that's a pretty small impact. $40,000 is a couple of paraprofessionals' jobs. So I don't want to diminish the size of $40,000 or the importance of it. But at the same time, there are other areas in which in our estimates of revenue where that can kind of balance out a little bit. But I think the big one I would say, and that I've been thinking about is transportation reimbursement. Now we typically have, we receive the money and we spend the money kind of in the same year. But we have established, thanks to Mr. Mangano's work when he was in this role, we have established a transportation revolving fund that allows us to treat it much like we do the special education circuit breaker, which is you sort of earn it one year, you receive it the next year, and you can spend it the following year. And so you do have a time limit on when you spend it. So there's potential for us, especially if we have a bit of a windfall, for lack of a term, or an overage in transportation funding in particular, we can start to build that revenue up and maybe move to a circumstance where we treat it like we do circuit breaker, where we sort of park it for a year and use it and budget it explicitly to the dollar amount. So that helps mitigate that sort of volatility that we see. I think that I'm always hopeful if revenues come in higher than expected. In worst case, they end up becoming E&D because we can't spend more than what we authorize for on the expense side. The revenue sources can be different than budgeted. We make estimates of those. Obviously, some are under, some are over. We try to be fairly close and really importantly sort of hit the mark relative to our overall need there and reasonable expectation of income in that regard. But any overages in those revenues that aren't budgeted as expenses can be either, like I say, sort of put into like the transportation revolving fund and then leverage for the coming year, or they go to E&D and are part and parcel of our budgeting for the subsequent years. And so we're trying to strike those balances and understand that that revenue as it comes in to make our choices and make our plans around our E&D spending both in the current year and in our subsequent years. And as you know, there is an upper limit on how much E&D there is, and so if we have been overly conservative in our estimates of expenses, then and our E&D gets too high, we're compelled to give some of that back to the communities. But I think this may be a good segue into this capital, is that there's opportunity to take that kind of those kind of revenues and think about capital projects, smaller ones that we can fund that way and reduce the capital expenditure and the borrowing that we might need to do. So those are all ways in which we might leverage revenues as long as we don't spend more than we had authorized. So would that it's a little bit of some of the options we have available to us.
Thank you. Let me see if Bernie has a question and we can move on to capital.
Not so much a question as a comment. I'm looking at the cherry sheets, and the House Ways and Means Committee is allocating 4% more in state aid than what you're currently getting. You're being more generous to the schools than they are to the towns because they reduced our general aid. So it's not, all things, it's not a huge amount of money, but it may be welcomed. And I'm glad to know that you've got some contingency plans and that some of this might get set aside for future use. That's it.
So if unless somebody has anything else, let's see if the questions about the capital side. Lynn, you had said you had some questions there.
Yeah, I do. They're not specific. They're more and this is no surprise, that it's really looking down the road and how we're planning for that. And are there, obviously, we're all hoping that we continue to have a wonderful relationship with the Mass School Building Authority, and that maybe they can help with some of the things that need to be done. But I'm very concerned about the long-term picture of our debt for the regional schools, particularly when it comes at a time when the town of Amherst may be taking on more significant debt as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all in that regard, and I think that I'm hopeful that even as early as this coming year, we have a project that's I think it's HVAC energy master planning. Sounds noble, doesn't it? But I think the idea is that we can be with a process like that. So there's a couple of pieces moving here. One is, we have two buildings that are 50 plus and 65 plus years old, or parts of them are. And so they're in need of some TLC, and there's no kind of getting around it, and they're big and they take a lot. So I think that's one piece to keep in mind. I think the other is that, we want to shift to environmentally more responsible modes of heating and cooling our buildings, greater comfort, greater energy efficiency, et cetera. And so some of the ideas with a master plan like that is to try to come up with some more targeted and focused understanding of the direction we can take with regard to that, which will refine the numbers and hopefully make them not quite so ominous, but nonetheless they may stay that, but they'll hopefully be more grounded in fundamentals of research that we've done. So that's another piece. I think back to the age of our buildings, and this was a point raised at the Four Towns meeting, and I think about whether to with a shrinking enrollment, do we reconsider whether to move our 7th and 8th grade over to the high school space, add a bit on the building. Currently, when we looked at that a couple of years ago, the cost of bringing the existing building fully up to code was pretty prohibitive relative to that. I mean, a really big number. However, as I was talking in a regional school subcommittee on budget, and one of the members said, well, there's maybe a tipping point on that it doesn't seem so bad, depending on what our real capital costs are to look at. So I think we're going to continue to keep our buildings as safe and healthy and functional as we can, make improvements to those things as coherently and logically as we can, and then also continue to weigh those sort of more fundamental shifts in how we utilize our buildings and how we might structure ourselves, in our spaces and what it would take. So I think those are all, questions that are in our mind and are in our thoughts as we do this capital planning. The current capital plan that you saw in the years out are kind of keeping status quo in a lot of ways. And so I think, we're going to be pressed over the next few years, and it won't be terribly long because I think we'll get a sense of whether MSBA will return to their accelerated repair program, because that's going to be critical for the roof of both middle school, high school, windows and doors at the high school. All of those are, that's a critical potential funding source to help us keep those buildings going. And like I said, the current sort of trajectory is based on a kind of status quo. If we see our enrollments continue to drop, if we can see some sense of what MSBA might look like and what they might be able to fund in coming years, it may shift our thinking about what we do and how we want to work with the physical space we have and what we do with the buildings we have. So those are all in the mix as we move ahead, and certainly are on my mind, certainly on the superintendent's mind and our facilities director's mind. We're kind of letting those things percolate and swirl around a little bit in our heads and be aware of those and try to be cognizant of that, because it is a as you look at those out years, there's some pretty significant numbers, and I'm pretty sure they're probably bigger than any of the four towns can afford, unless something dramatic happens that in a good way for the finances of all the four towns. So we're going to have to strike the right balance and think about these infrastructure changes in a pretty profound way. I talked earlier about a paradigm shift in what we do and how we do our program studies. This is an integral part of the physical plant process as well. It's going to be a paradigm shift in how we think about our buildings and what we can do within them and what makes sense financially for the four towns in the district to move ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually had identified the same issue, and I am concerned about developing what was a very thoughtful capital plan where you looked at all of the things that the schools need over a long period of time, and then came up with a solution that did not have a debt repayment schedule, that was something that was smooth and would therefore have some really unaffordable peaks for towns and unsustainable increases in some years. And I look ahead and think, gee, I'm not likely to be on the Council of Finance Committee when it really hits hard, but I got to think about the town and whoever is going to be responsible for those decisions at the time. And I really do worry about the sustainability of what's coming forward, which gets into the other question again, is that with shrinking enrollment and the cost of maintaining two aging buildings, aren't we continuing to kick the can down the road by not having a more serious discussion about that combining into one building question?
Yeah, and I think the thing is that we do need to. I mean, I think the short answer, and the short-term answer is it's still too expensive to collapse the two. But when will that shift? And sort of what combination of factors, whether it be enrollment or costs of maintenance and repair, what is our combination of factors that tips us into a direction that may be different than what we have now? I think that's a critical question that we've got to bring up and in some ways resurrect the conversation we had a couple of years ago, just because I think that there are options that are pretty bold in like moving a 7th and 8th grade, or moving a 6th, 7th and 8th grade across the street is a pretty bold change in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's and so I think as we look at those out years in the capital plan that we sort of laid out, the increases in cost are pretty profound. They're smoother, but they're still large. So they don't jump around, but they steadily increase to big numbers in a hurry. And I would, to be perfectly honest, they're certainly probably too big for any of the four towns to be able to manage at this point. So we've got to moderate those to some extent in the shorter term, and obviously in the next few years, really weigh those questions of where do we go? Because I think there's some pretty profound questions about our buildings and our enrollment size and that sort of stuff that we really have to revisit those questions from a couple years ago. There's no doubt.
Thank you. Kathy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to just continue on this same conversation and bring MSBA back into it. You know, it strikes me that we need to be working at the state level with our representatives to increase the flow of money into the MSBA program. I mean, I know it's a share of the sales tax, but they squeeze back on the accelerated repair so that they could be up the, which we benefited from for the elementary school because they upped the construction per square foot, but not nearly to where the construction costs are. And then at the last minute, we discovered this change in low income metric, which is tied to the MSBA reimbursement rate, changed the percent of the already reduced amount that they were willing to do. And so I sort of have a question on that metric because the free lunch and breakfast programs are driving it less as we get everybody on them. And Mass Health is a big one. Do we, if you're a family with children and your employer provides you with health insurance, your children potentially can be on your own policy, but they might also be eligible for Mass Health, and you leave them on your own policy. Do we do anything to assess that? You know, it's at least last time I looked, which is about 3 or 4 years ago when I knew this better, you still had the option to put your children on because of the children's side of the Mass Health program. So it's just a question on do we potentially have an undercount was my question. And is there any way of addressing that? Because you've probably followed this, Doug, but we're kind of just barely above a state average in the way the new metric is doing. So we had Sean, we had one transitional year that they went up and then they went back down again. So if we got more money in MSBA and there was an accelerated reimbursement program back on, making sure that percent is as high as possible would be good. So it's just a question of a strategy on the MSBA level that is related to this one, it's tied to this one metric in a way that I had not understood until we got into the weeds.
Yeah, it took Desi, sending the Desi expert to explain exactly how it worked. And just to build on that, Doug, it would have to be something that would, so that the comparison is the district's free and reduced lunch number compared to the state average. So it would have to be something that only was unique about Amherst. That wouldn't also be true of the entire state. And so, you know, Doug, you can probably explain it, but the state has gone back and forth with how it captures low income information for students. It used to use the standard free and reduced lunch forms. They thought that system was sort of not very accurate. So they went to a direct certification method where, you know, literally Doug uploads a list of, you know, even when, you know, before Doug was in his role, he did this. Doug would upload a list of all our students and they would compare all of our students to the state database for nutritional assistance and for mass health and some other state assistance programs. And then they would send back, here are all your students that qualify. And so, so they thought that was a more accurate system. And then they switched back sometime during COVID. Doug, you probably know more about that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, to some extent they shifted it because they realized what they gained or lost in using that complete direct certification model was the differential was more profound than they realized. I think a number of districts, rightly so, advocated on their own behalf to get a better metric involved, and so they kind of went back. I think one of the things we can do as a district, and this is really, I'm looking at, you know, sort of all three that I work with, is be really, as for lack of a term, aggressive about getting those forms filled out. You know, the direct certification is great in a lot of ways. It saves a lot of headaches and a lot of chasing of people relative to getting forms filled out. At the same time, it's imperfect. There's still, aspects of it, depending on how a parent fills out their paper form when they apply for SNAP benefits, can make a big difference as to whether or not we get a direct certification because of how we match things up. And there's not a great system for aligning those sometimes when we find differences. But I think that we also have with the university and the colleges in this area, it really, you have people that are temporarily poor by virtue of being graduate students with children and limited amounts of resources, and they make that choice and they need those supports, and oftentimes they're not aware that those supports exist. So I think that's one of the kinds of things we can do around our free and reduced applications is to really actively seek out, getting those forms to people, having them fill them out, because again, they can refuse the benefit if they choose to, but identifying them as being qualified is pretty important, because it's not only for things like MSBA, but it also there's Title I grant money that's tied to that kind of number. There's also a thing called E-rate, which is some support around some technological supports that is very helpful for us. There's a lot of reasons for us to spend some time and effort on getting forms out to people, getting them out, getting them back, because first and foremost, we want to get kids food and inexpensively if possible. Hopefully, we'll go to a universal free meals at a federal level. I think it's such high leverage spending by the government when they do that. It's really been phenomenal, I think, for our students and across the Commonwealth and across the nation to have done that. But independent of that, I think knowing the economic status of kids and the supports that come around with that, whether it be Title I or rate or building programs, are pretty critical to districts being able to function well and provide, in the case of MSBA, the infrastructure we need. So I think that there are things we can do to be actively pursuing the data to help ourselves out in that regard. I think to your other point, I think I would suggest MSBA needs some, it does need additional funding. I think there's probably a lot of schools that got built when ours did, baby boomers, and were a lot of schools got built in the late 60s and early 70s around people my age going to school, and those buildings are now 50, 60 years old. They need a lot of work. So, and accelerated repair program pretty critical, and so I think the state is going to need to find some other funding sources than just a sales tax to support that. So they need to find other mechanisms to support the MSBA program. I think that's, again, a sort of personal opinion about that, but for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into this topic too much because it's nothing that we can do about at this time. And I certainly am interested in the topic because of my role in the Fiscal Policy Committee, the MMA. Are there any other questions about the budget? Because I think that we're getting along in time and we have a lot to do today yet. If there are no other questions about the regional school operating capital budget, we have 3 orders that we need to make recommendations on to the council for the meeting, the next council meeting. I believe it's on the agenda. So I was going to make those motions, but Lynn.
So I was going to ask Andy whether there's 2 options. Okay. We've scheduled public forums for the 24th on the regional school budget, on the capital budget. And I guess there's one that's also scheduled for the other items. Do you want, we can either vote tonight and then, as we have done in the past, have a moment where we just reconsider anything before it goes to the council and then have the council vote on the 24th. The other option is we don't vote tonight. We do the public forums. We vote on the 25th and we actually vote at the council then on the 1st of May. So I'm looking for your thoughts on that because those options are available.
I don't have a strong feeling because I don't think that think that we probably know where this is going to go either way on this, in this question of timing. If there's anybody with strong feelings about this, because my inclination would be just go ahead and make the recommendations tonight and let's get moving. Do you not agree with that, Lynn?
I'm absolutely fine with whichever way you would like to proceed, Andy.
Is there anybody who would object to taking that up? Because otherwise I'm going to go ahead and make three motions, get votes on those motions quickly. Then we have one other item that Doug's going to hang on for, which is the first of the orders that has to do with the cannabis impact fee, and because it's actually a request to then be able, as Sean will explain, leads to a funding request from the schools. So I'm going to start by saying making a motion, or the first of the three motions. This one is in regard to the assessment method. I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the Council adopt Approval Order FY 24-01, an order approving the Amherst Pelham Regional School District Assessment Method.
Second.
So there's been a motion that is made and seconded, I believe that was Lynn. And I think we've had, if there's no other hands going up requesting any final discussion on the motion, I'm just going to go and proceed in order and get the votes. I also want to note that as Alicia told us in advance, she left the meeting at approximately 20 after 6, and should be noted as not being present. So back to the motion. I'll start with Lynn.
Yay.
Bob
Aye.
Hector
Aye.
is absent. Matt, are you?
Andy, I'm going to support it. I'm going to ask a question with my support though. Are we committed to reevaluating the 4% guardrail method annually, just with the 4 towns meeting and all that?
I think that the answer is yes, because it was recommended as a 1-year, this is a 1-year request for a change to the regional assessment method, and therefore it has to be back every year.
Okay, thank you. That's what my understanding, but I wanted to confirm that we're not, going to just stick with this as a matter of course forever. I support.
Okay, let's say hear from Doug or Sean. I'm going to assume that my answer is correct. And
I will say though, I just have to say, this being the second year we've used this method, to hear Matt say forever, and I don't know why, it just brings a chuckle to my soul when we've got a method that we've had for 2 years. Nothing against what you said, Matt, I totally agree. But it's just, we've had so many different methods the last, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years, that it's a success that we've gone to the same method 2 years in a row. Whether that's the method we stick with, that's a success.
Point taken. Yeah.
Bernie?
Perpetual assessment question, and I support.
Kathy?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia is absent. And Anna.
Aye.
So I think that we have 4 yes, none opposed. We have 2 members, one voting member absent. And from the resident members, we have 2 members in support. and one member absent. Second motion, I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt approval, appropriation, and transfer order FY 24-02 Amherst Pelham Regional School District budget assessment order approving the Amherst Pelham Regional School. I think we're good. Actually, just the budget assessment.
Second.
So, there's a second to the motion, again by Lynn. So moving down one, Bob Hagner is absent. Matt?
Support.
Bernie?
Support.
Kathy?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia's absent. Anna?
Aye.
And Lynn?
Aye.
Okay, same vote, so I won't repeat what it was, but do note that it was the exact same vote as in the last motion. And the third motion, I do note, is not a mandatory motion, but one that we have done in the past as a matter of just going on the record as to whether we have an opinion about it. But unless the council votes no, it happens the way that the rules work. But I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt approval order FY 24-03A Amherst Pelham Regional School District capital debt authorization.
Second.
So motion's made and seconded. Seeing no hands going up, asking for any discussion. So seeing none. Bernie?
Support.
Kathy?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia's absent. Anna?
Aye.
Lynn?
Aye.
Bob is absent, and Matt.
Support.
Okay, so that's again the same vote as on the others. So Sean, do you want to do an introduction of the next item just briefly, and then ask Doug to explain the program side of it?
Yeah, so the town has been receiving impact payments from cannabis dispensaries since we had our first dispensary. It's related to the host community agreements and was part of the original legislation. The requirement for the impact payments is that they go, if they're not appropriated, that they fall to free cash each year. And so we've been accumulating these impact payments in free cash for the last 3 or 4 years. And what we are proposing is to put the sum of our impact payments to date into a revolving fund, appropriate them into a revolving fund so they can be spent for the purpose of mitigating the impacts of the dispensaries. And so there's a couple that are being proposed for FY23 that one I'll talk about and one Doug will talk about. But the key here is that the funds are really restricted to being used for that purpose. It's not something we have the flexibility to play with. They're from the dispensaries, and that was the intent of the legislation, that they be used to mitigate those impacts. The state just didn't have a good mechanism for how municipalities could track them. So we think by putting them into this revolving fund, that will allow us to track them better, and then we can have a single place where all these expenditures are listed and recorded for future use. So for FY23, I'll do mine real quick because it's really simple. We've assigned some duties to an existing staff member to oversee the community host agreements. We have about 4 active ones currently for both medical and recreational dispensaries in town. And this person oversees the renewal of those agreements, the terms of those agreements. When the impact payments are due, they reach out to them if they're not paid on time. They deal with any issues associated with the host community agreements. So we've estimated that cost to be about 10 or 15% of that person's job, or sorry, 15 or 20% of that person's job, or about $10,000 that we would move to this fund. And that would be something we would do annually, which would relieve some pressure on the operating budget. And the second one, I will turn to Doug, which came from the schools.
Sorry about that. I muted myself and I had to find my mouse. All right. So not too long ago, the superintendent wrote a request for funding from those funds regarding some educational activities we'd like to do, and also some equipment we'd like. But I think that the broader thing is that we see this, and so if you get that memo, I don't know that it was in your packet tonight, but I'm happy to share that with you, Sean, if you don't have it handy. But the superintendent kind of lays out some of the rationale for an immediate use of some funding to do some training with some staff to get some curriculum materials and get trained up on that, and then implement those, but also some physical technology that we can use in the schools in particular. So we've reached out and done a survey of our students, and there's been some surveys in and around the area since the legalization of recreational use and medical use of marijuana. Students have talked about the fact that it's easier to get a hold of it than it used to be. Their evaluation of the risk of marijuana use, in particular through the method of vaping, is considered that it's not. Many of them consider it's not risky behavior, and so I think that one would suggest that may or may not be true, but it also, they may or may not be well informed in making that judgment of that. And so I think there's some areas in which we can do some curriculum work with kids to fully inform them on what is and what is not risky, and what are the implications and legal circumstances around marijuana use in the area, and what is and isn't allowed. We think the partners, the currently active businesses in town have been very good about complying with the law, and carding people and doing the same kind of things that our alcohol vendors do, as far as making sure that they're selling to age appropriate groups of people and that sort of thing. But I think that we want to approach this from the standpoint of some education that we can do, and would need to continue to do in future years as well. One of the other things that we've noticed is that vaping is a I don't want to say necessarily preferred, but it's certainly a expedient and easily concealed mechanism for partaking in marijuana. And so we put some vape sensors. There are technology that can identify if vaping is occurring in, say, a restroom. And we put some of those in place. We would like to put some additional equipment like that in place, and then obviously over time we want to continue to maintain that, potentially expand that. I think there's been some, for those kids that aren't participating in vaping of any sort, particularly that of marijuana, they've appreciated having those vaping devices in the places we put them to date. I think our staff are able to identify and have conversation with students and intercede in a way that's positive and appropriate for those kids. And it's really not been a terribly punitive kind of thing. It's been more of hey, the educational aspect, and this is an appropriate place, and educating them on the risks, and having them understand more fully, and work with them in that regard. And so I think we want to continue with that. So in the memo from the superintendent, he sort of articulated the short-term plans over the next a few months and early into next year, and the sort of associated amount of funding that we'd need for that. But then I think it'd be remiss to sort of just do it once and be done. I think we're going to have some ongoing and regular work we're going to want to do. The students are going to continue to cycle into our buildings from, they some graduate, new ones come in, and so it's a process that's ongoing with regard to that educational component, and keeping our staff up to speed on the changing landscape of marijuana use and various delivery forms that become more prevalent in different kinds and that sort of thing. And I think so for those reasons, we think that this would be a good use, and would be really supportive of our schools, and more importantly our students in making the good decisions, and being prepared to make the decisions that they should be making it 21 about this, but certainly until they turn 21, understanding the circumstances and risks and consequences of their actions. And so we're hopeful that you'll be able to support this in both the current year and then in coming years as well.
And just to clarify, the request isn't for, these are the types of things the funds will be spent on. You're not approving the specific request. The action in front of you is to appropriate the funds into a revolving fund. And then when it's in a revolving fund, it can be used as needed on these types of expenditures going forward. The host community agreement payments will likely wind down over the next couple of years to probably be zero at some point because of the new cannabis legislation. And so we don't expect this to be a recurring revenue source, but the good news is we've built up enough of a balance that we should have funds there to use for the several years into the future for things like this.
So let me ask a question then, just on what you said a moment ago, and that is, are you, with special revenue funds, can the decision for expenditure be made as an executive function of the town manager without further council action, or will this come back before the council for expenditure from that fund?
This would, no, the action by the council would be the appropriation now. Once it's in the revolving fund, then it could be spent by the executive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lynn?
We need to vote to create the fund.
Yes, and I have, that's what the order is.
Right.
And there's a motion. I just want to make sure that there's any questions about what was presented and what just now.
I don't, yeah, I do have one comment. Now, it's just that, and I don't want to get into trying to tell the schools the curriculum, but one of the things that is increasingly emerging is marijuana that's being sold on the street that's laced with harmful drugs. And perhaps one of the things that we want to teach kids to do is buy from reputable dispensaries and not buy on the street because of that very issue. So it's just a commentary on what's going on in society today.
Matt?
Thanks, Andy. This is something I've been interested in since we were talking about the impact fees, the cannabis revenue during the reparations discussions. I support this and will support the motion, but I would just like to have a discussion. Hang on one second, I'm sorry. I would like to know, I guess my interest is in the public benefit of learning what are we defining as the impact of dispensaries. So that's, I don't think that anybody wants the council necessarily managing the programs or the funds, but I am very curious just some sort of what metrics we wind up drawing to determine impact and what, in other words, what is it that we're trying to mitigate? Some of that data I think would be interesting to the public good.
Yeah, no, it's okay if I respond to that briefly.
Sure.
It's a good question. There's obviously very tangible impacts, like the vaping curriculum, like police details, impacts on infrastructure. Some communities have seen a lot of very tangible impacts. You probably all remember Northampton when they had the lines, around the sidewalk and police details and things like that. And then there's the sort of broader societal impacts, which I think are less easy to quantify, but still real. So it is a good conversation. I think it's evolving. Cities and towns have done lots of different things, or sort of considered impacts in different ways. And I think we're still evaluating impacts. We've chosen to kind of see what other communities are doing and hear from departments how they've been impacted. And this is our first sort of request to expend these funds. But it is an ongoing question around, how broad are the impacts from dispensaries?
I don't know if Paul has any comments himself or if seems not any further discussion, and recognize that in recommending then the creation of the fund and the appropriation to the fund, we're creating a fund that we're now looking at as an administrative function for making the decision on expenditures from the fund, so that I will be clear in what I write up for the on behalf of the committee if we do this, if this passes, to make that point very clear to the council as a whole. So if there's any discussion on that point, it's appropriate that we have that discussion now. Otherwise, I'm going to proceed with the motion so that we can get on to the next agenda item. Matt.
I would just request some kind of mechanism for the town manager to report back on what impacts are being mitigated to the council, I guess.
I've seen a nod from the manager as you said that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's
I'm going to make the motion as I have it on a motion sheet. If somebody amends it to be more specific on the point just raised, then that can happen, of course. But I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt Order FY 23-16A, an order appropriating from free cash to the Cannabis Impact Special Revenue Fund. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so there's been a motion that's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the motion? I'm going to give a real pause here because we just had a discussion about one aspect. Seeing no.
Andy, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I mean, I'm not suggesting we do this, but is there an alternative where the council would actually approve appropriations of these funds? Or is that not in the construct of the revenue source?
So you could probably make it a stabilization fund if you wanted to have that type of control. It would still separate the funds. Again, we propose this for sort of administrative efficiency and being able to respond to issues like this one, given everything that, all that's in front of the council. But an alternative could be another, special purpose stabilization fund, like we've created a couple of them recently.
I personally would not go that far, but I would recommend, some kind of a public report, so there's a public discussion about the matter.
Would you suggest that the committee ask that the order be amended to include that there be a request with an understanding that the town manager will report as expenditures are made to the council?
Yeah, I think that sounds great, Andy. An ongoing reporting mechanism would be perfect.
I mean, I'm willing to make that an amendment if Lynn agrees as a seconder. So Lynn, you have your
Yeah,
hand.
I'd like it to be that on an annual basis, so that it's not considered something that he has to track weekly, monthly, whatever. Annually is more than sufficient.
Okay, let's make it on that basis then. So we will amend it so that we're approving, recommending that the council adopt Order FY 23-16A in order establishing appropriation for free cash to Canada's Impact Reserve Fund, with the understanding that the town manager will report annually to the council on expenditures from the special revenue fund.
As a seconder, I agree with that.
Okay, I'm just writing for a second. I'm sorry. So with that being said, and that being the motion on the floor, if there's no further discussion, then start with Kathy.
Yes, yes.
I will be a yes, of course. Alicia's absent. Anna,
Aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
Bob is absent. Matt
Support.
and Bernie.
Support.
Okay, so again, motion, the vote could be summarized as I on the prior motions. I will not repeat it. So, Doug, thank you very much. Appreciate your having been with us, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all's time and all the work you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice.
So let's recognize Guilford if he's still with us, and then we need to take stock of where we're at at that point, because I know we're getting on in time. Lynn?
I just want to mention that both Michelle and Alicia are perfectly fine with delaying the item until next meeting.
Okay, I was going to ask that question. But let's go on, and I'm going to actually ask Sean to introduce each of the topics and orders, and then let Guilford speak to them. And the first ones, I believe, first one I'm looking at it in order, Solid Waste Enterprise Fund.
Sure. So these are all Guilfords that I get to collaborate with them on. So the first one is the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. One of the biggest expenses for solid waste are tipping fees. It's basically what we pay haulers to take trash away from the transfer station. And it's a volatile cost that is tied directly with the price of fuel. So as fuel costs go up, or if we just have more people using the transfer station and there's higher quantities, the cost goes up. And one thing we saw at the end of last fiscal year, and it trickled into this fiscal year with higher fuel prices, were higher tipping costs. So when we looked at our expense budget, we didn't feel confident, our expense budget in the enterprise fund, we weren't confident we were going to be able to get through the year on the expense side without having an overage. So we're requesting $25,000 from retained earnings within the solid waste enterprise fund for the tipping fees, specifically for the tipping fees, but it will increase the expense budget to get through the rest of the year. We've got about 3 months left to pay for, and I looked at it, we had about $13,000 left. And when I looked at what we spent last year, that's how we got to the number. And if there's anything we don't spend, it just goes back into retained earnings at the end of the year. Where it's coming from, so it'll come from retained earnings, which we had sufficient funds to appropriate that amount, and we're going to be putting quite a bit back into retained earnings this year because of the new solar pilot rental revenues that we have in the fund. So we weren't quite sure when we were going to get our first rent payment, when they were actually going to do the ribbon cutting and the timing of that. It did end up happening this fiscal year, FY23. So we received our first rent payment that was not budgeted. So that will go into retained earnings, and then we'll be budgeting that going forward. So we will be more than replenishing this amount of money at the end of the year just from that revenue source. Guilford, anything you want to add on that one, or maybe I'll just keep going unless you want to add anything?
No, you're doing fine.
Okay.
Actually, let's take them in logical groups.
Okay.
Just to complete them out. Guilford, one quick question, and that is there any change now? Is there a direction downward in the tipping fees?
No. Tipping fees. We got a notice from one of the disposal sites that they're almost doubling the price for mattresses that are considered dirty mattresses that can't be recycled. Those prices have now doubled. So they were $60, and I think they're going up to 120. So the prices are just going up. They're not going down.
I only asked because mention was made of fuel costs, and fuel expenses have gone down since they were at their peak. Other questions on this item for Guilford? Looking to the committee to see if there are any hands.
And our retained earnings balance right now is 199,000 in that fund.
If there's no discussion, no request for discussion, then I'm going to make a motion, move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt Order 23-04C, an order appropriating a supplemental increase to the Town of Amherst Solid Waste Enterprise Fund operating budget for fiscal year 2023.
Second.
Oh,
So there's been a motion, it's been made and seconded, and there's been no request for discussion. I'm seeing no hands going up now, so alphabetically, I'm going to start the vote by voting yes, and note that Alicia is absent. Anna,
Aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
note that Mr. Hegner is absent. Matt,
Support.
Bernie. Bernie, that was a support.
Support. Yeah.
Okay, and Kathy.
yes.
So again, note the same vote as in prior.
You need to, did you do Anna? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
I think just for the record, Andy, let's just say 4 members of the Finance Committee, voting members voted aye, 1 is absent.
correct.
And 2 non-voting members of the Finance Committee voted to support and 1 is absent.
Yes, and I do note that that has been the vote on all as they've been recorded and that will be reported fully in both the minutes and in in the Finance Committee report. But thank you. So then let's go on and go back to you, Sean.
Sure.
So we're going to be talking about reuse waters, and that's the next one.
Yeah, the next 2, if you're okay with, I'll do as a pair because they're somewhat related. So these are 2. They're both related to borrowing authorizations in the Sewer Enterprise Fund. So the first one is rescinding the balance of the reuse water authorization. It was originally a $5 million authorization. We have spent about 4.7 million. So we want to, or sorry, we've spent about 300,000. We want to rescind about 4.7 million, not to freak anybody out. So we want to rescind the balance of that. And to a public commenter's earlier comment, reuse water and billing for reuse water is something that we're going to be looking at over the coming years. And so that will certainly be looked at. And the second one is the gravity belt. So the gravity belt's a critical piece of equipment in the wastewater plant. We originally had an authorization for 2.3 million to replace it. It was sort of bad timing, just like the Centennial project. I think it was the same year where everything we had voted that year came in way below budget because of the cost escalation and because of the pandemic and just the timing of how it all merged. So Guilford's worked with our engineers to get revised cost estimates in order to complete that project, which we do have to complete. And we will need about $1 million more. So it's going to increase what we want to do is rescind the original authorization of 2.3 million and replace it with a new authorization for 3.3 million to complete the project. And so the net here is we're saving about 3+ million or so in debt authorized in the sewer fund between these two actions. And it will get the gravity belt project complete. Guilford, you probably want to add to that.
The only thing I'd add is the gravity belt thickener is what processes sludge. So if you don't use the belt thickener, you actually just ship out sludge that is just mostly water, and it just increases the cost for sludge disposal. So this is a critical piece of equipment that actually thickens the sludge and allows you to ship out more sludge, less water, and saves you money in the long run as long as it's working properly.
Bernie has a question. Bernie.
Yeah, for the gravity belt thickener, is that eligible for a low interest state loan like an SRF loan, or is that something we're going to have to bond for?
It would be eligible if we had applied at the time, but SRF loans when we were starting this project were kind of hard, and we were kind of staying away from them because our interest rate was good. And we're at the process now where if we went out for a SRF loan, we'd delay this another 1.5 years.
No, we don't want to. You don't want to do that.
No, we need to get it going, please.
I won't make any sludge jokes, but we don't want to do that. Thank you.
Oh, it could get really messy.
Any more puns? Any more comments or questions? Kathy.
I have an related question, but I'm all for doing this. It's when the nicely thickened sludge leaves us. Does anyone work on recycling it and turning it into fertilizer and dirt? I actually saw this happening in Austria and a couple countries. And I know this is sewer, but just in terms of thinking, where I'll stop. I think my question was clear.
So our sludge goes to one of the 2 incinerators that burn the sludge and make electricity with it. It goes to Hartford, and they use it. And when Hartford is full and won't take it, it sometimes goes out east to Blackstone. There are places that do compost it, but a lot of that's come to a stop now because composting sludge and using it for field applications or other such things has actually been one of the causes for spreading PFAS contamination. So it's not burning it right now is probably one of the better things to do with your sludge.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else in the way of questions at this point? This was unfortunately the 3 different orders here that we're going to have to go through really quickly. But I think we have to do them one at a time. I don't know if it would really be appropriate to combine them. Do you have an opinion on that, Sean?
I think because these are related to debt, I would do them one at a time just to make it super clear.
Okay. I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the Council adopt Order FY 2313D, an order rescinding authorized but unissued bonds originally approved by vote when taken under Council Order 2109D, reuse of water.
Jane seconds.
Okay, so motion's been seconded. Seeing no hands going up. Back to the top of the order, and Anna.
Aye.
Lynn.
You're muted, Lynn.
Aye.
Bob is absent. Matt.
Support.
Bernie. Kathy.
Yes.
I'm a yes, and Alicia is absent, so it's the same vote again. 4 yeses, 1 voting member absent, 2 resident members in support and 1 resident member absent. The next motion would be, I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt Order FY 2313E, an order rescinding authorized but unissued bonds originally approved by vote taken under Council Order 21-09C gravity belt thickener. For a
Second. Second.
Okay, Lynn seconds. And Lynn, we're going to the vote.
Aye.
Again, Mr. Hegner, Bob is absent. Matt,
Support.
Bernie,
Support.
Kathy,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia is absent. And Anna.
Aye.
So it's again 4 members yes, voting members yes, 1 counselor absent, and of the resident members 2 in support and 1 absent. And the last of the motions in this group is, I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt Order FY 2309B, an order approving and authorizing borrowing to fund capital projects bond authorization for gravity belt thickener.
Second.
And seconds. And so this time I will note that Bob is absent. Seeing no hands going up. Matt,
Support.
Bernie,
Support.
Kathy,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia is absent. Anna
Aye.
and Lynn.
Aye.
Okay, so it's 4-0. 1 council member absent, 2 and of the resident members 2 in support and 1 absent. So we've completed that group. I watching the clock very carefully because it I think is when I hit the 2-hour point, I want to adjourn and postpone other agenda items to the next meeting unless there is a request to not do so. I'm going to first of all thank Guilford for having been with us today. I don't think that you're unless going to stay for the last item.
Yeah, Guilford's been helping support that project.
Okay, Matt, your hand is up, so let me.
Oh, Andy, I just wanted to, since you were talking about the timing right now, I realize that we've made this 5:30 switch. And I just, I guess when I signed up for the Finance Committee, I really asked what time the meetings were going to be, and that 3 o'clock slot was sort of something that I could manage. And I am worried that this may not be sustainable for me either. And I realize, the counselors need to come first in terms of finding a time, but this is a challenge. And I know that we've heard from staff about, staff hours after working hours are done as well. So I would just hope that we sort of keep an eye on this and not fix this as our ongoing time. I realize May is going to be a meeting heavy time and we set the cadence for that, but beyond May, I hope we can keep this conversation open and just continue to poll the various members of the committee.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And it is something that we need to revisit. And I was even going to bring that topic up eventually, but I think we'll postpone it until the next meeting. Because as you gather, I'm trying to set a limit on tonight, just because it was 5:30 and wanted to keep it to 2 hours if I could.
Do you want me to keep going, Andy?
Yes, Sean, why don't you go back to the last of
Okay.
orders that were submitted?
Yeah, well, and real quickly, if there is a way we could at least set the dates and times that we're going to meet for May, that would be helpful because I want to get department heads scheduled for the month of May. It's a pretty hectic schedule in terms of lining people up and making sure all the departments get in front of the finance committee. And so I do want to be able to put something in their calendar soon. So if there's a way we could even get the dates and the start time set, then I can at least get
Okay.
that confirmed.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but why don't you go ahead and
Yeah, so the last request is for 110,000 to demolish the gas station at 24 Montague Road and make some adjacent site improvements related to the North Amherst Library project. I think the part of this that's a little bit unexpected is just the timing of when it would all come together and be completed. I think we do agree with some of the comments made by the public commenters, and one of the things I spoke with Paul last week about was potentially changing the funding source to repurpose capital. We do have a sufficient balance where we could change the funding source from free cash to that. So I think Paul was totally on board with that. That's change if that's the committee's will. But free cash can be used for one-time capital purposes as well. So I'll turn it over to Guilford, who can explain a little bit more about the timing of the project and why this is coming up now.
So the timing is, we're almost done with the library project. We are on schedule. We're supposed to be done the end of August. When we were talking about wrapping it up and how to open the new library, there was a lot of comments about, well, can we get rid of the gas station and have the whole site in the condition it should be in at the end of the project? Right now, if we do not take down the gas station, the project will have a parking lot that's half new and half old. We originally just was going to pave the parking spaces immediately next to the library, and those are going to be the parking spaces. But when we went through site plan review, they wanted a larger parking lot. The funds weren't in the project for that. So what we said was we would use half the old, we'd use the existing payment that was there and kind of fudge the two together and make a parking lot. A lot of people have looked at the library and said, this is a great project. It's looking really good. Would be a shame not to have everything finished when we're done and have half finished and then have more work that has to be done. So the request is really to take down the gas station. The fence will be extended where the Ernie's is storing cars. That'll be extended to hide their cars so you wouldn't see the cars. And then the space between the fence and the library would be regraded, seeded and loamed, and then the parking lot would be complete. It would be exactly as approved by the site plan review. It would be 21 parking spaces is what they approved. So it would just wrap up the whole project and make it nice. There's actually some money in here also for fixing some of the sidewalks next to the property as well, and the public way on the state highway and on the town highway. So that's also in the mix here. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with this, and we're trying to make it so that when we finish this project and walk away, we won't have to come back to it, and we can go on to the next building projects that we have to work on.
what about the question that was raised regarding the potential plan? I'd say that about the potential plan of bringing the roadway across that way and reconfiguring the whole road network.
The way we've been working the entire project, nothing being done at the library, including the enlarged parking lot that was required, will impact anything we want to do with bringing the road into Sunderland Road into Montague Road. That won't impact it at all. Removing the garage actually helps move that project along a little bit, because that's one thing that has to go away, is moving that garage.
I'm going to recognize others, and if I want to come back, if they don't raise it, might come back to that a little bit more. But Lynn?
So I heard Sean suggest that the source of funds might be changed and moved to leftover capital money. And given the observations that have been made here tonight during public comment, seems to me like that's a wise decision. And so my first question is, do we need to reissue this order, or can we amend it on the spot?
John, do you have any thoughts?
Paul, do you
Paul.
approve
I
amending it?
do, yeah, so I think the order is the appropriation. The source of funds can be adjusted appropriately, as the finance committee makes a recommendation.
Okay.
So I think that's within the framework.
Right, thank you. So my next question is, it's been a while since I've looked at the hoped for change to the North Amherst intersection. Are you suggesting that we would not be paving the area that might in fact become a road down the pike? Pardon the pun. I mean, down a road, should we finally change that intersection?
Correct. The parking lot for the library will not encroach at all on the area that would be needed for the roadway.
Okay, and then my final question is, I know that in the past we have applied for grant, Mass Works grant for this intersection when we were doing North Village. That application was not successful. North something was considered too far away. Maybe it's the Rupter. I just know we've applied in the past.
Yeah, it was North Square.
Yeah, North Square, and we didn't get it. And so do we see this as a potential now with the new with the renovated library and the other project up at Ball Lane as an opportunity again, or are we still looking at Ball Lane being too far away?
I think Paul wants to answer that.
Well,
So when we applied last time, after we were rejected, we really did a hard work to try to get that grant. We had the secretary come down, visit the site. We talked with the governor about it. We pulled out all of our stops and it didn't get funded. These are grants that are, but for the grant, the project wouldn't happen. Ball Lane is going to happen, whether we get a grant to do this or not. I think it's a challenge for us to get a grant. We didn't think this was a competitive grant application this year, and actually, quite honestly, we have a lot that we're still digesting through. We have a lot of projects in the mix right now.
Mhm.
So pull together a grant application for this without having a high degree of success expectations. We didn't think it was valuable to do that. So I don't think that this would be a competitive application.
I mean,
based on everything we've looked at.
Yeah, if North
Oh,
Square.
and just the other thing is we did meet with the undersecretary, somebody after the grant application was not approved, to understand where the weaknesses were, and that was really what they had told us, because we do when we aren't successful with the grant application, we ask them to come out, talk us through where we could have made it better, things like that. And it was really just the traffic counts weren't strong enough to really argue for this, and so we didn't have anything that really compelled them to want to fund it at this point in time. At that point in time.
And so I would observe that Ball Lane is even further away than North Square.
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
Or Mill District, so
Sure
it
it is.
doesn't
No,
seem
it-
very competitive.
From North Square?
No, from Ball Lane is north of the Mill District.
Well,
Right.
yeah, but it's right on Montague Road, so it feeds where Mill District is off on Coles, just in terms of the flow of traffic. Yeah.
I hear you. I think we need to respect the decisions of the staff in terms of based on what they've gotten as feedback and the competitiveness. These are not small applications, but that's just my personal opinion based on years of writing proposals.
Kathy?
Yeah, I want to build on this because Pomeroy, the grant you got for Pomeroy felt like a miracle, because the compelling arguments on what was going to happen on traffic, if you drive through there, traffic doesn't feel like traffic ever compared to what we've got up in danger, not just traffic in danger. So I think the near misses up here are pretty severe. So I'm just wondering, Paul, I'm not saying that we could get something and pull it together by June 2nd, because we also don't have full agreement on what it should look like, other than we want to bring that road over. But with the smart light and the apparatus getting serious about traffic counts before UMass goes away, because we are now getting backed up again, where for a while that light was working beautifully, Guilford, but and it's only at certain times a day, but waiting for 3 or 4 changes before you get through the light. And it's so much better than it was, but it used to cross 116, it's getting backed up. So I think we should be pulling as much data together, Paul, as possible to make a compelling case. And I think one of the things you're going to see on the comments on Ball Lane, people love this project, but everybody is worried about 44 new, or whatever the number of new units is, with the potential increase of traffic flow, where now that the Mill District is full, as opposed to still waiting for people to enter, the truck traffic, the delivery truck traffic, the UMass traffic is here, and you would not want to measure it over the summer. You want to be measuring it when you met. So that it's just a real urging of building both conceptually and a database with a compelling argument. So my only one on the 110,000. I mean, we would love to get the library. When I say we're North Amherst, we would all love it. It's gorgeous, and to get it done. So Guilford, I know you were pushed by planning to do a lot of parking places. Those of us who use the library were astonished by that pressure because people walk to our library. There's not a lot of parking at the library. So I also want to think through, when you put that pavement down, should we ever swing the road in, there'll be another place the parking could go if we need that road, that intersection to be wider. So just trying to think of how you juggle all of that. And I know you've got all the maps and you've got the width of it, but just making sure we don't do anything that infringes on maybe being able to swing it out. And the only last comment I'll make is you had to do some, I think it was running of the new water line into the bathrooms, where Sunderland Road was temporarily, you couldn't go north on it. You allowed some passage. That intersection felt so safe when you didn't get that crossing over of cars. Everyone was saying, maybe we could just continue construction for what time and keep that barrier up. It was just noticeable when you were trying to leave here or come up here that you weren't getting that coming over of cars. So just trying to think of it as a real safety, particularly if kids start walk. If we're hoping that some of this housing will have children in it. And so just trying to think of paying attention to the counts and getting ready. So that's just my plea on all of this. Gather better data this time. I mean, we have a way of counting that we didn't before without a special study. We can just count, cars. Thank you.
Well, since somebody else is asking to speak, this is the first that I heard about the number of parking spaces that was required with the permit, and somebody had asked my opinion about that. I would have been astounded, because unless one assumes huge events going on that are going to involve lots of cars in the community room on a regular basis, for the library itself to need more than 10 spaces, including street spaces along Sunderland Road, as where they are now, would probably exceeds anything that I have observed in the North Amherst Library use in all of my years of using it. And I don't think that it is increasing. So I really wonder if that's something that needs some time, some thought. And the other questions that I have, just not sure that I'm ready, that I feel comfortable making the motion as it is, for the order as it is currently worded, because the motion, the order says, be it ordered, the town council appropriate $110,000 for the demolition of the gas station. I'm trying to read through it quickly. And to meet such appropriations, transfer $110,000 from free cash for appropriation. So it does have the transfer built into the order. And if we're going to revisit that question, not the if, but the how funded, I don't think that I feel comfortable making the motion. Paul?
So I wonder if Sean can come up with draft motion to, instead of free cash, what words they could put in there. And I think in terms of the parking requirements, Andy, the community room, Guilford can correct me, holds 49 people. And I think that's what drove the parking requirements. They were assuming that not if there's an event there for whatever reason, there's 49 people who are going to show up. They're not all going to walk, and that's why I think how they came to that number.
The parking requirement was definitely directly out of the zoning requirements.
And all the people who live up here said that's too many parking places, Andy. You know, even if event was there, you know, in terms of the way we've used when we go to the Pine Street co-housing and the big co-housing, there aren't, it houses 40 people and we don't all drive, we walk.
Yeah, but this is a town-wide.
Yeah.
It's not just restricted to North Amherst residency. Anything could be held there.
Yeah.
Bernie?
Yeah, it's been observed, and not just in Amherst, but in other places, that we tend to overstate need for parking and zoning. That's a problem that's been addressed in a lot of other places, and we need to think about that. I know from my time on the Transportation Advisory Committee that Guilford's put a lot of thought into how we make that whole intersection, that whole interchange of streets better, safer. Trying to walk through there, which I've done, is a horror show. And I trust that, you know, Guilford will come up and its crew will come up with a great plan to do that, which will then be second guessed for the next 5 years. And I think we just need to, we have an umpteen different unsolved transportation problems in town. And this one should be a priority. And if we have to pay for it, we have to pay for it. In terms of where the money comes from, doesn't matter to me. Might as well take it out of free cash rather than try to redo everything. This is what's been published. At some point, if there's extra money left over in capital appropriations, the council can move it back to free cash. Thank you.
So here's if you do want to amend the order, Paul, in the past when we use this repurposed capital account from time to time. We used it last year for the cost escalation fund for inflation. And so it's just, we call it the repurposed capital account, essentially capital that's been closed because projects came in under budget.
Are there funds sufficient to cover that?
Yep. Yeah, no, there was a balance of about $500,000. Some of it's being recommended as part of the FY24 capital improvement program as well. So there's not a huge balance, and it's there to make sure if projects need a little bit more, they can do that. But we had some larger projects close out some funds this year, so there's sufficient funding there to cover this.
I think that's a much better way of doing it.
I agree.
Abe. So is there further discussion? Because otherwise, I think we'll then go ahead with the amended motion language being referenced. Is the motion would be, I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the council adopt order FY 2305D, an order appropriating funds for a portion of the town of Amherst capital program demolition of the gas station located at 24 Montague Road and site improvements.
As amended?
As amended.
Oh, okay, adopt order FY 2305D as amended.
Second.
So we'll add those words into what I made as a motion. So it would read that the motion is that the Finance Committee recommend that the town adopt order FY 2305D as amended, an order appropriating funds for a portion of the town of Amherst capital program demolition of the gas station located at 24 Montague Road and improvements. So that's now been a motion that's made and seconded. Further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, I'm trying to, why don't I just start with Kathy, because I'm not going to.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Alicia's absent. Anna,
Aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
noting that Bob is absent. Matt,
Support.
Bernie.
Support.
Okay, so the motion again is 4 in favor, 1 voting member absent. Of the 3 resident members, 2 in support and 1 absent. I think that if there's agreement that we're going to meet on the 25th as planned, then it would make sense to postpone the minutes that we plan to do for tonight for the next meeting so that we can turn this meeting tonight. Is there any thing that people would like to raise? And the other thing I just want to point out is that we are going to come back then to reviewing committee meeting days and times. But I think that unless the one thing I'd want to hear, because Sean has asked for it, is there any feeling about varying the May meeting dates? And I have one other topic thing I just want to alert you to, but Kathy?
You know the dates that I'm not going to be here. I put all those dates that were sent out to us in my calendar, so I'm fine. But I would just like confirmation soon for when I am here and for next week that 5:30 is a realistic time, that we reorganize ourselves for 5:30. So Lynn, whatever you can do to get confirmation on that, because we're going to have everyone working through their dinner time in May on Tuesdays if the person who needed the time change can't actually be here, and staff. So that's just my request. And then the other thing I was just going to say, since I'm not going to be here for the first part of, I will be here for the 3rd of May, and then I will be back. I'm willing to take assignments for the days I'm here in town. And so you can give me those. And even if I will get my questions or comments on other sections in as quickly as I can. It's just, but that Paul, I may not have the whole budget book, so I'm going to have to be reading online because I'm leaving here on the 4th, and I don't think I want to carry it with me. So that's just my comment, Sean, on yours. I mean, all of those dates worked for me, but now I'm seeing that 5:30 is a difficult time for people.
So the way I have it is it's Tuesdays at 5:30, and they will frequently last till 8:30, and Fridays at 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock for most of the Tuesdays and Fridays in May. And if there's no objections, we've got sort of a schedule laid out so I can get department heads queued up for that.
Can I confirm Andy, I don't know, have you been able to talk to Alicia about the 5:30 time? Will it consistently not work for her? Do you know? Because I think that was one of the reasons why we had shifted it. And I think that if it's challenging for other committee members as well, just checking in, because it sounds like now it might not work for her anymore.
I was the one that spent some time with her. I will check back with her. It was my understanding that 5:30 was going to work. And Andy and I found out late this afternoon that it wasn't going to work for more than an hour tonight. So.
Okay, but okay. I thought I had heard something about that being a continuous thing. Andy, I will let you know that I do have something that has come up for next Tuesday that I will not be able to be here. I may be able to join for the second part of the meeting, but I'm not certain. And I apologize for that. I found out about it recently.
The one thing that I'm going to be asking for responses to at the next meeting is the issue that Kathy raised, and that is that we need to decide who is interested in what sections of the budget, and there's no reason that needs to actually wait for a meeting. We're not going to discuss it really at a meeting. So if what I'm probably going to do is send out a request that people send me an email with what their preferences are, and to get the information that way, just emails to me, and then I'll report it back to the committee as opposed to having it as a full discussion item.
Thank you. And will you also
be prepared for that email?
I will be prepared. And will you also, when you do that, just kind of give a quick overview of what that entails to make sure that we are adequately prepared to do that job? As someone who's new to the finance committee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Basically, to give you the 30-second version is to spend extra time on the assigned section in the budget book, and to take the lead to make sure that core questions, that somebody's really giving some thought to the questions that need to be asked about the budget aspects of those sections of government, and then to follow up and sort of take the lead with the first draft of that section of the committee report. And I'll send out last year's committee report again so that people can get a sense of how it came out. And so that's what it's about.
And Anna, just on the questions, is trying to send them in before we meet so that the department head has already seen the questions, so that Sean gets us answers to the questions is the other way, that we can have a discussion informed by answers to questions, not just all ask them. Yeah.
Asking them, and then, yeah, thank you.
It doesn't get all questions out of the way, but at least it gets a portion of the questions out of the way in advance.
We did something similar at when I was on CPA. It was great. It was a good process.
So with that, is there anything else that people need to tend to tonight? We have 2 sets of minutes. I should let you know that I went through the minutes, and I will. The edits are really minor, and I may just send out the edits and the packet for the next meeting to make it easier, because I had it in Word and was able to do it that way, but they're really minor stuff. So with that, I think we can declare the meeting adjourned, and appreciate everybody's participation. It's been a hard meeting, but we got a lot of work done.
Night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.